There are thousands, if not millions, of cases of missing people worldwide. While some people are found, many are never seen again, not because they disappeared, but because they were psychologically manipulated, groomed, and trafficked, stolen into a life where they are forced to work against their will. When I first started researching human trafficking, I realized it is not just a crime, it is a psychological process. Traffickers use fear, trust, emotional manipulation, and control to trap victims. Understanding this made me want to hear how deeply psychological this issue is. Trafficking doesn't only happen through kidnapping. Most victims are controlled mentally and emotionally long before the physical abuse begins. This makes the issue something everybody should care about because psychological manipulation can target everyone. To reduce human trafficking, we must understand the psychological tactics traffickers use, recognize the emotional warning signs, and spread awareness about how psychological vulnerability plays a role. I will explain how traffickers psychologically groom victims, why certain individuals are more vulnerable, and how understanding psychology can help us prevent exploitation. To understand why human trafficking is so dangerous, we first need to look at the psychological damage it creates. First point is, human trafficking causes severe psychological trauma. Victims often experience trafficking through manipulation, abuse, coercion, threats, and emotional control. Trauma can also last for decades. According to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, many survivors avoid seeking help because of economic hardship, mistrust of authorities, and intense psychological vulnerability. This can result in PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, dissociation, and even Stockholm syndrome. This need for mental health support is urgent, yet most survivors cannot access therapy. And human trafficking is far more common than people think. Human trafficking is the second most profitable illegal industry in the U.S., according to the U.S. Department of State. About 27 million people are trafficked globally each year. The state of Nevada has one of the highest rates in the country, with 5.78 cases per 100,000 residents, most involving sexual exploitation in Las Vegas. Many people are drugged, threatened, and stripped of control. Yet, even U.S. citizens who escape trafficking often cannot afford therapy, and without treatment, trauma becomes an endless cycle. Worldwide, 49.6 million people live in modern slavery, also known as human trafficking. 54% of these people are women and girls, and 91% knows their trafficker, making escape emotionally and psychologically impossible. Without psychological care, survivors remain trapped in trauma long after the trafficking ends. To end human trafficking, we need psychological solutions, not just criminal ones. We first need to lower mental health insurance costs. Affordable mental health can ensure that survivors, and especially people who live in the U.S., who escape trafficking, can receive long-term trauma therapy. We also need to raise awareness and education. Communities, schools, and workplaces should teach people how to identify trafficking signs, support survivors, and reduce stigma around seeking help. We also need to provide free psychological support. Some will argue that providing free psychological support for trafficking survivors is too expensive, too time-consuming, or simply unrealistic. They may say that government budgets are already stretched, or that mental health professionals don't have the capacity to take more clients, but the cost of not providing psychological support is far greater. When survivors don't receive therapy, many struggle with PTSD, addiction, homelessness, or fall back into cycles of exploitation. Free psychological care doesn't just help survivors heal. It prevents future victimization and restores people's ability to rebuild their lives. Investing in healing will never be a burden. It is an important measure that saves communities and saves survivors' futures. If we commit to supporting survivors now, we can create a future where healing is possible, where victims aren't left alone with trauma, but are guided towards recovery and safety. Now imagine two futures. If we do nothing, real-life survivors like Maria, an immigrant housemaid in Canada who feared authorities, struggle with language barrier, and couldn't trust therapy, will continue suffering alone. More victims will be psychologically groomed, manipulated, and trapped in cycles of trauma. And human trafficking will continue to thrive in silence. But if we take action, survivors will regain trust, support, and mental stability. Communities will recognize warning signs and prevent trafficking before it happens. Victims will no longer feel alone, forgotten, or afraid, and we will break the cycle of exploitations one life at a time. These two features show us what's at risk and what's possible, but possibilities only become reality when we act. Today, we learned that human trafficking is not just a criminal act. It is a deeply psychological process that causes long-term mental trauma. We also saw that trafficking is far more common than most people realize, yet survivors often cannot access the therapy and emotional support they desperately need. And finally, we explore solutions that focus on providing psychological help, lowering mental health costs, and increasing education and awareness so communities can recognize the signs and protect vulnerable individuals. This issue matters to me deeply because when I first began researching human trafficking, I realized just how invisible the psychological side of it truly is. I was astonished by how many victims are manipulated long before they are physically abused, and how many survivors are left alone with trauma they never asked for. Understanding the emotional pain these individuals carry made me realize that as a community, we have a responsibility, which is not just to rescue victims, but to help them heal. This is why I'm passionate about spreading awareness. If even one person hears this and can recognize the warning signs or help a survivor, then this message has purpose. Today, I ask that you don't take this issue slightly. Recognize that human trafficking is a psychological crime. Learn that emotional warning signs and support efforts that make mental health care accessible to survivors. Share what you learn, advocate for better mental health funding, and be aware of the ways traffickers manipulate vulnerable people. Together, we can help break the cycle of modern slavery. Human trafficking is more than just a criminal act. It is a psychological wound that society ignores. As a community, we have the responsibility to help those who cannot help themselves. Victims of trafficking often feel alone, afraid, and forgotten. We must show them that they are not. Psychological manipulation is silence, but our awareness doesn't have to be. Thank you.